Rain falls softly over the silent manor house. Inside, the windows glow faintly against the storm, their glass trembling with every gust of wind. The war outside is unseen, but ever present in the hum of distant radio static, in the tapping of typewriters, in the low murmurs of men and women who know that every number, every letter, could mean life or death. In a cramped office, a man sits alone. His sleeves are rolled up, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. In his hand, not a weapon, not a code machine, but a pencil. Its tip scratches against the paper, drawing shapes, numbers, and probabilities that no one else can yet understand. Behind him, the sound of rain merges with the faint echo of Morse transmissions intercepted from across Europe. Each message is a puzzle, wrapped in layers of logic and despair. The man pauses, taps the pencil against his notebook, and stares into the void of thought. On that desk lies the war's most secret battlefield, fought not with tanks or guns, but with silence, intellect, and lead marks on paper. His name is Alan Turing, and with that pencil, he is about to change the world. By the time war erupted in September, the German military had already transformed communication into a weapon. Beneath the steel might of the Wehrmacht and the thunder of Luftwaffe bombers lay a silent, invisible power, a network of coded messages that tied every division, every submarine, every operation into one unbreakable system, Enigma. At first glance, the Enigma machine looked harmless, a compact device with keys, rotors, and lights, resembling a heavy typewriter. But to the Allies, it was a wall of steel wrapped in mathematics. Each time a key was pressed, the machine translated a letter into another through a shifting electrical maze of 150 trillion possible combinations. By the time the message reached its recipient, it was unreadable to anyone else on Earth. To Germany, Enigma was invincibility. To Britain, it was blindness. In the first months of the war, Enigma-coded orders guided U-boats across the Atlantic, unseen and unstoppable. Merchant convoys carrying food, oil, and weapons from America to Britain were hunted down with surgical precision. Entire crews vanished into the icy depths, leaving nothing but oil slicks and lifeboat fragments. Each time the Allies thought they had understood the pattern, the Germans changed Enigma's settings, resetting its internal wiring every midnight. The next morning, all previous intelligence became useless. The code reinvented itself daily, mocking every effort to catch up. For Britain, whose survival depended on the sea, this was a silent catastrophe. By early 1940, the Royal Navy was losing ships faster than it could replace them. The Admiralty had no answers, only unanswered signals. The war machine of Hitler's Reich moved like a ghost, coordinated by messages that no one could read. In London's war rooms, Winston Churchill studied the reports of shipping losses. Every red line on the chart represented tons of food, fuel, and lives lost. Britain was an island, and the island was starving. He understood the truth. The battle for the Atlantic would be decided not by ships, but by intelligence. Whoever understood Enigma would command the seas. So the British turned to their scientists. Mathematicians, linguists, chess champions, minds that could see patterns in chaos. They were gathered quietly into a single, secret location, a Victorian mansion in Buckinghamshire, hidden behind hedges and country fences. The place was called Bletchley Park. There, teams of cryptanalysts began a desperate race against time to break the unbreakable. They worked around the clock, armed only with intercepted German messages, logic, and perseverance. Yet, for months, they failed. The Germans were too careful, their machines too complex. Every attempt ended with the same frustration: walls of nonsense, lines of letters without meaning. And then, in early 1940, help came from an unexpected direction from Poland. Before the war, a trio of Polish mathematicians, Marian Rogowski, Jerzy Rosiecki, and Henryk Zygalski, had made the first breakthrough against Enigma. Using mathematical deduction and sheer ingenuity, they had built replicas of the machine and found methods to predict some of its rotor settings. But with Germany's invasion of Poland in 1939, their work had to be smuggled out, handed to the British and French in a desperate act of scientific defiance. That Polish gift became the seed of all future progress. At Bletchley Park, British cryptologists built upon their foundation. They studied the machine's wiring, replicated its logic, and experimented with early mechanical aids. Still, the problem was too vast billions of combinations to test every day, with no time to waste. They needed something more than logic. They needed a mind that could see structure where others saw chaos. By 1940, that mind had arrived, quiet, awkward, brilliant. A Cambridge mathematician who thought in patterns and probabilities, who preferred equations to conversation. His name was Alan Matheson Turing. When he first walked into Bletchley Park, the war was already devouring Europe. France had fallen. Britain stood alone. And yet, in that dim-lit room filled with typewriters and cigarette smoke, Turing saw something others didn't. He saw a pattern beneath the noise, a weakness in the code that could be turned against itself. He would not fight with guns or ships. He would fight with logic. And it would all begin with a simple instrument, a sheet of paper, and a pencil. The estate looked like nothing special, an eccentric country house surrounded by green lawns, small huts, and muddy pathways. There were no soldiers marching, no flags flying, no signs of war. Yet behind its unassuming walls, Britain's most secret war was being fought not with bombs, but with ideas. Inside, the atmosphere was relentless. The codebreakers worked in shifts, 24 hours a day. Young women from the Women's Royal Naval Service operated typewriters and sorting machines, intercepting endless German radio transmissions. Mathematicians hunched over papers filled with strange diagrams. Engineers built machines that clattered and hummed like mechanical beasts. Every intercepted message began its journey here stripped of meaning, waiting to be reborn through understanding. The rooms were small, the air stale, the work monotonous. Yet every breakthrough, every word deciphered, could save a convoy, a city, or a nation. Turing entered this world quietly. He wasn't a soldier, and he wasn't easy to understand. His colleagues found him peculiar, brilliant, socially awkward, detached. But those who worked with him quickly realized that his mind functioned differently. While others approached enigma with intuition or pattern spotting, Turing approached it with mathematical abstraction. He didn't try to guess the answer, he built a system to find it. To understand his challenge, one must understand enigma itself. Each German operator had a daily key, a set of rotor positions and plugboard connections unique to that day. With 3 rotors out of a possible 5, each with 26 positions and 10 plugboard pairings, the total number of possible combinations was astronomical, roughly 150 quintillion. Even if one tried to test 1,000,000 settings a second, it would take centuries to find the right one. Human brains couldn't handle it. Neither could the basic tools at Bletchley. So Turing proposed something unheard of, a machine to defeat a machine. He called it the bomb, an electromechanical device designed to run through possible enigma settings at incredible speed, identifying patterns that could reveal the day's key. The concept built upon the earlier Polish designs, but expanded them dramatically. Turing added logical shortcuts, cribs, as he called them, based on probable phrases in German messages. Words like weather, or Heil Hitler could serve as anchors, giving his machine a foothold in the chaos. It was revolutionary thinking, but building it wasn't simple. Each bomb machine required hundreds of electrical circuits, precise rotors, and mechanical synchronization that tested Britain's limited wartime resources. Engineers at the British Tabulating Machine Company in Letchworth worked around the clock, constructing the first prototype under Turing's guidance. By early 1940, the first bomb, codenamed Victory, came to life. When switched on, it filled the room with a rhythmic mechanical pulse, thousands of relays clicking in unison, spinning through millions of possibilities every minute. The operators watched the dials blur, their reflections flickering in the polished metal panels. It wasn't perfect, not yet. The machine found possible keys, not definitive ones. The results had to be verified by hand, a process still grueling, still uncertain. But it was faster than any human mind could dream of. For the first time, Britain had a weapon that could challenge enigma's mathematical fortress. Still, Turing wasn't satisfied. He refined the bomb's logic, pushing for more machines to be built. If we can get 10, he told his superiors, we might win the war. But there was resistance. Bureaucracy slowed him down. Funding was scarce. The War Office didn't yet grasp how vital the work was or how close they stood to changing the war's direction. Meanwhile, the Atlantic bled. In 1941 alone, the Allies lost over 4 million tons of shipping to U-boats. The German submarines, coordinated through Enigma messages, hunted in wolf packs, cutting off Britain's lifeline from the Americas. The Kriegsmarine's Enigma variant used an extra rotor, increasing complexity even further. Every day of delay at Bletchley meant another convoy lost. But Turing didn't stop. He and his small team, including Gordon Welchman, Dilly Knox, and Joan Clark, worked through nights of exhaustion and isolation. Their only light came from the glow of desk lamps and the slow rhythm of pencil against paper. And then, finally, a spark. In May 1941, a German U-boat U-110 was captured in the North Atlantic. Inside, British sailors discovered something priceless, an intact Enigma machine along with the current codebooks. For the first time, the Allies had a direct look into the enemy's encrypted world. The pieces were finally aligning: the captured codebooks, the logic of the bomb, and Turing's relentless drive. What had once been an unsolvable problem was beginning to crack. The storm of the Atlantic still raged, but now, for the first time, Britain had a glimmer of sight through the fog. And at the center of it all, pencil in hand, Alan Turing began to turn that glimmer into light. The war outside thundered on distant but constant. Bombs fell over London. Families huddled in blacked-out homes. But in the quiet isolation of Bletchley Park, the war was fought in silence, a silence filled with the scratching of pencils, the whirring of machines, and the constant ticking of clocks. Every minute lost meant ships sinking, soldiers dying, messages vanishing into static. In Hut 8, the Naval Code-Breaking Division, Alan Turing worked at the heart of this storm of secrecy. Yet even here, surrounded by Britain's finest minds, he was alone. To those around him, Turing seemed almost alien. He avoided small talk, spoke abruptly, and often disappeared into his thoughts mid-conversation. Colleagues would find cryptic notes on his desk, half-finished equations, strange logical symbols, or abstract doodles that only he understood. He had little patience for social niceties. But in his mind, patterns formed where others saw only chaos. He lived in a world of structure and logic, where even the most complex mysteries could, eventually, be solved. But outside that logic, the world did not make sense to him. Many at Bletchley admired his genius, but few understood the man. He ran everywhere, literally jogging across the estate and into nearby villages to clear his thoughts. He wore a gas mask while cycling to protect himself from hay fever. He chained his tea mug to a radiator to prevent it from being stolen. To some, these habits were oddities. To those who looked closer, they were signs of a mind under relentless strain. Because behind Turing's calm intellect was an unbearable weight, the knowledge that every failure, every delay cost lives. He knew that thousands of men and women were dying at sea because his machines weren't fast enough, his logic not complete enough, his deductions not yet perfect. He carried those ghosts with him every night when the lights dimmed and the air fell still. And yet, there was something else that haunted him, something that could never be spoken aloud. Turing lived in a time when his very nature was illegal. As a homosexual man in early 20th century Britain, he carried a secret that, if exposed, could destroy him completely. Even within the confines of Bletchley Park's secrecy, there were limits to what one could confess. So he hid it not with shame, but with necessity. His refuge was work. In the ceaseless logic of Enigma, there was no judgment, only problem and solution. No politics, no prejudice, only the truth of mathematics. In that truth, he found peace. His leadership in Hut 8 wasn't through authority or command. It was through example, through relentless thinking, quiet perseverance, and a belief that the world could be reasoned into sense. He inspired his team not through speeches but through determination. People like Joan Clark, a brilliant young mathematician, found in him a mentor and an equal, someone who respected intellect above all else. Together they formed a small community of minds dedicated to a singular goal: defeating Enigma. But Turing's methods often clashed with the military establishment. He was direct, impatient with protocol, dismissive of hierarchy. He didn't care about uniforms or ranks, he cared about logic and results. To the officers overseeing Bletchley, he was both a genius and a problem, someone who could save the war, but on his own terms. And yet, despite his eccentricities, the results began to speak louder than any complaint. The bomb machines, running day and night, started producing breakthroughs. Intercepted German signals began to reveal patterns, U-boat positions, convoy routes, planned attacks. Each time a message was decoded, it was as though the fog lifted, if only for a moment. Convoys were rerouted, ships saved. For the first time, the German wolf packs were being hunted instead of the hunters. But the secrecy was total. The men and women at Bletchley could never speak of their victories. They could never tell their families what they were doing. Even when the war ended, many would remain silent for decades. And so, in those cold huts, surrounded by wires, notes, and the unending rhythm of the bomb machines, Turing and his team labored in anonymity, unsung, unseen, unheard. They lived between exhaustion and obsession, between humanity and machinery. They didn't see themselves as heroes. They were simply people solving problems, people who believed that even in the darkest war, reason could outthink destruction. Yet behind Turing's quiet determination, a deeper question was taking shape, one that went beyond enigma, beyond war itself. He began to wonder, if a machine could think faster than a human, could it also think like one? The question would one day shape the entire future of computing, but in that moment, it was just another mark of graphite on a page. For now, there was only one goal: break enigma, save lives, end the war. And with each turn of the bomb's rotors, each pencil line drawn across a page, they came closer to doing the impossible. The heart of Bletchley Park did not beat with blood, but with electricity. Inside Hut 11, rows of metal giants stood humming rotating drums, switches, cables, and relays, all synchronized in a mechanical rhythm that filled the air with constant noise. It was the sound of logic made physical, of thought turned into motion. Each of these towering devices was a bomb, Alan Turing's electromechanical masterpiece, the machine that would do in minutes what no human could do in a lifetime. The design was elegant in its complexity. Each bomb consisted of 36 Enigma-equivalent rotor sets mounted on a frame. When activated, it tested thousands of possible key settings every second. Its spinning rotors blurred into motion, creating an industrial symphony of clicks and clatters. The process was simple in theory, impossible in practice until now. Here's how it worked. Allied intercept stations across Britain and beyond, known as Y stations, recorded thousands of German radio messages each day. These encrypted messages were sent to Bletchley Park, where analysts tried to find cribs, known phrases likely to appear in the text, such as Heil Hitler or Wetter Vorhersage, weather report. By assuming where such a phrase might fit in the ciphertext, the bomb could eliminate impossible settings and narrow down the day's key. Each bomb run could take hours. But when the machine stopped, when the rhythm halted suddenly and the room fell silent, it meant something extraordinary. A possible enigma setting had been found. The operators would note the results, cross-check them, and send them to the decoding huts. A few successful runs each week could shift the course of entire battles. But even as the British gained ground, the Germans were not idle. The Kriegsmarine, the German Navy, introduced a new version of Enigma in early 1942-1 with 4 rotors instead of 3. This seemingly minor addition increased the number of possible combinations exponentially, effectively resetting the challenge. For Bletchley Park, it was a nightmare. The bombs that had once sliced through the code were now too slow, too few, too limited. German U-boats once again vanished beneath the Atlantic, cutting off Allied supply lines. Turing and his team had to evolve, and fast. He began redesigning the bomb, reconfiguring its internal logic to handle the new 4-rotor system. Engineers and mathematicians worked together in frantic collaboration. New machines were commissioned, larger and faster than before. But there was another man who would prove just as vital in this stage: Gordon Welchman, a brilliant mathematician who, introduced the concept of the diagonal board, an addition that allowed the bomb to test multiple logical pathways simultaneously. This single innovation multiplied the machine's power and efficiency, transforming it from a clever tool into a true weapon of computation. By late 1942, dozens of bombs were operating across Britain. The most advanced units were housed in secure facilities near Birmingham and Manchester, each one consuming enormous amounts of power. They ran around the clock, their mechanical chorus audible even through thick walls. And with their growing power came results tangible, life-saving results. Allied command began receiving decrypted German naval messages almost daily. The once invisible U-boats now had positions, orders, and routes exposed. Convoys could be diverted away from danger zones. Destroyers were sent to intercept submarines with uncanny precision. This flow of intelligence had a code name, Ultra. Under the strictest secrecy, Ultra decrypts were funneled directly to British High Command. Even Winston Churchill referred to them only as the Golden Eggs. He once said, "It was thanks to Ultra that we won the war." Yet the paradox of Ultra was its invisibility. Every victory had to be disguised. The Allies could not act too often on decrypted messages, or the Germans would suspect their code had been broken. Commanders had to strike selectively, letting some ships fall, to preserve the illusion of ignorance. It was a terrible moral calculus, one that haunted the men and women of Bletchley Park. They knew when a convoy was doomed, when hundreds would die, but could do nothing without risking the secret that could end the war entirely. In that ethical gray zone, Turing's machines became both saviors and silent witnesses. But technological warfare moved quickly. By 1943, Enigma's logic was being matched not just by human intellect, but by the dawn of mechanical intelligence. The bomb represented more than a military tool, it was the beginning of a new kind of weapon, computation itself. Each whirring rotor, each flicker of an indicator light, represented the transformation of war from physical to informational, from brute force to data. The battlefield was no longer only land, sea, or air. It was the invisible world of signals and logic. Turing's machines were the first in that world. By 1943, the scale of Bletchley's operation had grown beyond imagination. Over 9,000 people worked there: linguists, engineers, clerks, mathematicians. Women made up nearly 3/4 of the workforce, operating bombs, intercepting transmissions, and handling endless data. Each day, they processed tens of thousands of messages, transforming German secrets into Allied strategy. And in one of history's ironies, this massive effort, this new front of the war, began from nothing more than a man's handwritten logic, penciled out on scraps of paper. Turing had taken the pure abstract world of mathematics and turned it into machinery, into movement, into advantage. The pencil lines had become steel and wire. The equations had become the pulse of the war. And as the machines spun and clattered through the long British nights, they whispered a single truth, that the greatest battles of the modern age would not be fought by armies alone, but by minds. The air was thick with the smell of oil, dust, and electricity. The bombs had been running for hours, their metal frames vibrating against the wooden floors, filling the hut with a low, constant roar. Operators moved between machines like engineers in an engine room, recording readings, resetting rotors, marking results. The night outside was cold and silent, but inside the war raged in code. Alan Turing sat at his desk, his pencil moving in short, precise strokes. Before him, a sheet of intercepted German text, rows of meaningless letters, another encrypted naval message. It had arrived from a Y station hours earlier. Most of the team thought it routine, another dead end. But something about the pattern caught Turing's eye. There was a rhythm, a structure buried within the nonsense. He took a deep breath, adjusted his glasses, and began marking assumptions in the margin. "This section," he murmured, "could correspond to Wettervorhersage weather forecast." The others watched as his pencil danced across the page, reducing the incomprehensible to order, stripping it layer by layer. Within minutes, he had built a test configuration for the bomb. The operators set the machine accordingly. The switches clicked into place. The rotors began to spin. The room fell into a trance of motion and sound the heartbeat of computation. Each rotation represented a hypothesis, each click a test of logic against reality. Then, after 40 minutes, one of the machines stopped. Silence. The operators leaned in. The machine's indicator lights froze on a particular setting. It was a possible daily key. Turing bent over the readout, double-checking the pattern. His pencil scratched across the page again, translating the gibberish back into German this time, with meaning. The words appeared slowly, almost painfully. U-boat Group West attacks convoy HX-229 at dawn. For the first time, they were reading the enemy's intentions as they were being written. Within hours, the decrypted message was in the hands of the Admiralty. Orders went out across the Atlantic. The convoy, still days from danger, shifted course northward under cover of fog. When the German U-boats surfaced the next morning to begin their assault, the sea was empty. Their prey was gone. The message chain that had begun with a radio pulse in occupied France had ended in British hands, intercepted, broken, defeated. That night, for the first time in months, the British Navy reported 0 losses on the Atlantic route. It was a small victory in the grand scale of war, one convoy saved, one trap avoided. But for the men and women of Bletchley Park, it was proof that their invisible war was being won. From that moment, the floodgates opened. As the bombs multiplied, dozens now running in shifts across Britain, decrypted messages began to flow like a secret current beneath the surface of war. Entire German command structures were exposed. Admiralty analysts could see how U-boat wolf packs were deployed, when they refueled, where they waited. Each time a message was cracked, a new layer of the enemy's strategy unfolded. The results were immediate and profound. In the first half of 1943 alone, U-boat sinkings by Allied forces more than tripled. The once invincible German submarine fleet was now being hunted relentlessly, often ambushed before they could strike. For the first time, the Allies could predict where danger lay before it happened, an advantage that turned survival into strategy. Historians would later call this period Black May. In May 1943, Germany lost 41 U-boats, over 1/4 of its operational fleet, while Allied shipping losses dropped dramatically. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat arm, could not understand how his enemy knew so much. He suspected spies, leaks, even magic. But never enigma. The Germans considered it unbreakable, a mathematical fortress that no mind could breach. They were wrong. Every decrypted message from Enigma was labeled ultra-secret intelligence, so sensitive that only the highest-ranking Allied officers were allowed to see it. Even many commanders who benefited from it never knew its source. But in the cramped huts of Bletchley Park, the truth was known. Each time a message yielded, the operators would exchange a brief, tired smile, not of triumph, but of relief. Another convoy spared. Another battle won before it began. Another tiny step toward ending the war. The pressure, however, never ceased. Enigma keys changed daily, the race renewed every midnight. The moment one message was solved, another arrived. The cycle of logic, calculation, and exhaustion continued endlessly. And through it all, Turing remained the quiet center, the mind behind the motion. He spoke little, slept less, and carried the burden of success and failure with equal weight. He often said that the machines were doing the thinking now, but in truth, the machines were extensions of him, of the fragile human mind that had conceived them. As 1943 turned into 1944, the work at Bletchley expanded beyond naval codes. Enigma variants from the Luftwaffe and the German High Command began to yield as well. The Allies could now read enemy communications across entire theaters of war. This intelligence would soon feed into a greater plan, one that would decide the fate of Europe. The invasion of Normandy D-Day would be built on the invisible foundations of Ultra. The codebreakers would never storm a beach or fire a weapon, but their work would guide every bullet, every ship, every drop of blood that followed. In the quiet heart of England, beneath flickering lights and graphite-stained fingers, the tide of the Second World War had begun to turn, not with guns, but with a pencil and a mind unafraid of the impossible. The war had entered its most decisive stage. Europe lay under German occupation, but behind the calm facade of Nazi control, cracks were forming, cracks born of information. At the heart of it was Ultra, the intelligence born from Turing's machines. Every morning, a small courier left Bletchley Park, carrying a leather pouch marked Most Secret Ultra. Inside were decrypts of German messages, their meaning stripped bare by the logic and machinery of HUD-8. These reports bypassed normal military channels and went straight to the highest levels of Allied Command: Eisenhower, Montgomery, Churchill. Few others even knew they existed. It was through Ultra that the Allies began to see the German war machine from within. They knew which divisions were stationed where, which ports were fortified, which commanders doubted the Führer's plans. They saw the invisible threads holding Hitler's empire together and learned how to cut them one by one. In dark, smoke-filled rooms, maps of Europe covered the walls. Red and blue pins marked divisions, supply lines, and airfields. Every time a new message was decrypted, a pin moved, a line shifted, a decision changed. It was Ultra that revealed the location of German radar networks across the French coast. It was Ultra that exposed the movement of panzer divisions in Normandy and the Netherlands. It was Ultra that confirmed the success of the deception campaign Operation Fortitude, convincing the Germans that the Allies would land not in Normandy, but in Pas-de-Calais. This illusion, sustained through false radio traffic, dummy divisions, and double agents, worked only because the Allies could see through decrypted messages that the Germans believed it. When Enigma traffic showed that Hitler had reinforced Calais and left Normandy relatively underdefended, Allied commanders knew their deception was complete. The machines of Bletchley had given them the confidence to proceed. The largest amphibious invasion in history began before dawn. Over 156,000 Allied soldiers crossed the English Channel under fire and stormed the beaches of Normandy. But beneath the roar of aircraft and artillery was a quieter triumph, one that had already begun months earlier, in the mechanical heartbeat of Bletchley Park. Every step of the operation had been informed by Ultra intelligence. The naval routes were chosen to avoid known U-boat positions. The timing of the landings matched decrypted German weather forecasts. Even the counterattacks on the beaches were anticipated, because Bletchley had already read the orders moving through Wehrmacht communications. For the German commanders, the invasion came as a shock. Their units were scattered, their reinforcements delayed, their lines of communication fractured. Many of their messages never even reached the front, intercepted, decrypted, neutralized before they could do harm. It wasn't that the Germans lacked strength or courage, it was that they were fighting blind. The invisible war that Turing and his team had waged from behind typewriters and bomb machines now echoed across every battlefield in Europe. The Allies seemed to move with uncanny precision, striking where the enemy was weakest, avoiding traps before they were sprung. What few realized was that this precision came not from luck or divine fortune, but from information pure, mathematical foresight born of logic and steel. While the world focused on Normandy, the codebreakers worked as usual. There were no celebrations, no rest. The machines clattered on, decoding new orders, identifying new reinforcements being sent to France. Messages poured in, frantic German signals reporting confusion, lost divisions, failed counterattacks. The codebreakers read the panic in real time. Turing, seated quietly in his office, barely spoke. He was proud, but he also knew the war was not over. There were still thousands dying each day, and the bombs could not stop every loss. He looked at the spinning paper reels, at the pencil smudges covering his desk, and murmured softly to no one, "The machine does not win the war, it only gives us a chance." And he was right. Ultra had tipped the scales, but it was human courage, from the beaches of Normandy to the skies over France, that carried the momentum forward. Still, without Ultra, D-Day could have been a disaster. Without those lines of logic, drawn years earlier by one man and his pencil, the Allies might have walked straight into the strongest point of the German defense. Instead, they struck the weak point. And from that day forward, the end of the Reich was no longer a question of if, but when. German communications began to collapse. Entire command chains were in chaos. Enigma messages, once the symbol of Nazi order and precision, became desperate pleas for reinforcement and supply. The Allies were reading them all. Hitler still trusted Enigma completely. His generals, bound by fear and obedience, dared not question it. They did not know that every signal, every whisper, was already echoing through the halls of Bletchley Park before it reached its intended receiver. The war of information had been won. By the spring of 1945, as Allied forces crossed the Rhine and closed in on Berlin, Enigma had become obsolete. The once unbreakable code had been dismantled by pure human reasoning, by logic, patience, and the quiet persistence of one man's mind. When victory in Europe was declared, there were no parades at Bletchley. The operators simply turned off the machines, locked the files, and went home in silence. The war had been won, in part, by people who would never be named, their triumph hidden behind the Official Secrets Act for decades. And at the center of it all stood Alan Turing, a mathematician who had never fired a weapon, yet had helped end the most destructive conflict in human history. His weapon had been a pencil. His battlefield, a sheet of paper. His victory, a world saved from darkness. But peace would not bring him peace. For Turing, the post-war years would unveil a tragedy deeper than any he faced during the war won, not fought against an enemy abroad, but against prejudice at home. Victory in Europe Day. The war was over. London erupted in celebration streets, flooded with joy, music, and tears. Flags waved, bells rang, strangers embraced in the ruins of a city that had endured 6 long years of fire and fear. But in the quiet lawns of Bletchley Park, there was only silence. The workers stood outside the huts for the first time in years, blinking in the daylight. No one cheered. No one sang. The code breakers, whose invisible war had saved millions, simply packed their papers, locked their machines, and waited for orders. The orders were simple. Destroy everything. The bombs, the intercept files, the decoding notes, all were to be dismantled, burned, or buried. Their work was to vanish, as though it had never existed. For decades to come, the true story of what had happened in that countryside estate would remain one of Britain's most guarded secrets. Even among themselves, the veterans of Bletchley rarely spoke of what they had achieved. The Official Secrets Act forbade it. The people who had altered the course of world history went back to ordinary lives: teachers, typists, civil servants. Their contribution unspoken, their names unknown. Alan Turing returned to Cambridge for a time, then to London. There was no medal, no public recognition, no parades in his honor. The men who had commanded armies were knighted. The man who had deciphered the enemy's mind was forgotten. But Turing did not stop thinking. He had seen what machines could do, how logic could be made real, how thought could be given motion. To him, the end of the war was not an ending, but a beginning. He began writing about artificial intelligence long before the term even existed. In 1950, he published a paper titled Computing Machinery and Intelligence. In it, he posed a question that would define the next century. Can machines think? He proposed an experiment, later known as the Turing test, to determine whether a machine could imitate human thought convincingly enough to be indistinguishable from a person. It was the logical descendant of the bomb, the next step in the same pursuit to make machines reason as humans do. But the world was not ready to understand him yet. Britain moved on from war. Rationing ended. New industries rose from the ashes. The world entered the atomic age. And Turing, now working at Manchester, continued to push boundaries, developing some of the world's first true computers, massive machines that filled entire rooms and processed logic faster than any human could calculate. But outside the laboratory, the same country he had helped to save would soon turn against him. In 1952, police discovered his relationship with another man, a relationship that, under British law at the time, was a criminal offense. He was charged with gross indecency. The court offered him a choice: imprisonment or chemical castration. He chose the latter, unwilling to give up his work. The hormone treatments destroyed his body and tormented his mind. He lost his security clearance, was barred from continuing his classified research, and was isolated from the very institutions his genius had helped protect. The nation that owed him its survival condemned him to obscurity. And yet, even then, he never expressed bitterness. To his friends, he spoke of science, of logic, of curiosity. He built small machines in his home. He studied biology, fascinated by the patterns of nature. He lived, as he always had, by reason even when reason could no longer save him. On June 7, 1954, Alan Turing was found dead in his home in Wilmslow. Beside him lay an apple, half-eaten. The coroner ruled it suicide, though to this day the details remain uncertain. He was 41 years old. The man who had shortened the war by years, who had saved millions through pure intellect, who had invented the foundations of modern computing, died a criminal in the eyes of the very nation he had rescued. But history would not forget him forever. In time, truth would surface. Declassified documents, memoirs, and confessions from those who had served beside him began to emerge. The world would finally learn of Bletchley Park, of Ultra, of the mathematical genius who had beaten Enigma. And with that truth came shame and gratitude. For decades after his death, Alan Turing's name was barely known outside a handful of academic circles. The official files on Bletchley Park remained sealed, classified as state secrets. His work, his machines, his war all were erased from the public record. But time has a way of uncovering the buried truths of history. In the 1970s, when the British government began declassifying wartime intelligence, a new story emerged, one more incredible than fiction. Historians and journalists discovered that deep in the heart of Buckinghamshire, a secret army of thinkers had broken Hitler's most powerful weapon. The legend of Bletchley Park began to surface. Among the thousands of names, one stood out: the quiet mathematician whose machines had made the impossible possible. The man who had saved convoys, safeguarded the invasion of Europe, and shortened the war by at least 2 years. The world began to ask, who was Alan Turing? In 1974, historian F.H. Hinsley published the first official history of British intelligence in World War II, confirming what had long been whispered. The breaking of Enigma had decisively altered the war's outcome. By the 1980s, Bletchley Park itself was being restored as a museum. Veterans returned for the first time in decades, elderly men and women standing before the huts where they had once fought an invisible war. Some wept. Others smiled quietly, finally able to speak of what they had done. And in every retelling, in every interview, one name returned like a refrain: Turing. Visitors saw his reconstructed desk, the replica bomb machine, the worn pencils, the handwritten notes filled with impossible logic. For many, the realization was staggering that the computers, phones, and networks defining the modern world had their roots here in the quiet work of one man during humanity's darkest hour. But the rediscovery came with a moral reckoning. When the truth of Turing's prosecution and death became public, Britain faced a profound national shame. The same state that had trusted him with its most vital secrets had later condemned him for his identity. Public campaigns called for justice, not only recognition of his achievements, but an apology for his treatment. Scientists, politicians, and citizens alike demanded that his name be cleared. In 2009, then Prime Minister Gordon Brown issued a formal apology on behalf of the British government. "We're sorry. You deserve so much better." 4 years later, in 2013, Queen Elizabeth II granted Turing a royal pardon nearly 60 years after his death. The words of the pardon acknowledged what history had already judged, that his life had been one of service and brilliance, not of crime. But the real measure of his legacy lay not in titles or apologies, it lay in the world he had helped to build. Every computer, every smartphone, every algorithm owes something to the principles Alan Turing first imagined. His concept of the universal machine, one device capable of performing any calculation through logic alone, became the foundation of modern computing. His theoretical work on artificial intelligence planted the first seeds of what would become machine learning and AI, the very technologies now shaping the 21st century. And yet, for all his influence, Turing's spirit remains deeply human. His story is not one of machines replacing mankind, but of human thought expanding its reach, of intellect defeating tyranny through reason, not violence. In the quiet world of wartime secrecy, he proved that a single idea, written in pencil on paper, could change the destiny of nations. Today, A bronze statue of Alan Turing sits in Manchester's Sackville Gardens. He holds an apple, a quiet nod to the symbol of knowledge and to the myth surrounding his final act. On the plaque beneath him are words as simple as they are eternal. Father of computer science, mathematician, logician, wartime codebreaker, victim of prejudice. Every visitor who stops there sees the same truth. That brilliance and compassion often come from the most fragile souls, and that sometimes the greatest victories are won not on battlefields, but in silence, with nothing but a pencil, a mind, and a belief in truth. Turing's legacy was no longer hidden in classified files or dusty archives. It lived in the machines that carried his logic, in the freedoms secured by his work, and in the enduring reminder that humanity's most powerful weapon is thought itself. But history, like mathematics, always seeks closure. And the story of Alan Turing, the man who saw patterns in chaos, ends not in tragedy, but in transformation.